My husband scattered our divorce papers across the conference room floor in front of his mistress and 31 employees, then told me to pick them up before I embarrassed him again. "Sign them and get out, Nora," Blake said. "People here are tired of pretending you belong in this office." The room went so quiet that I could hear the ventilation system humming above us. A few minutes earlier, the staff of Bennett Urban Partners had been holding champagne glasses because Blake had announced the biggest contract in our company's history. Now those same people stared at the carpet, the ceiling, or the polished table, anywhere except at me. Madison Shaw stood at Blake's right shoulder in a cream suit that cost more than our first office rent. She was 34, sharp, beautiful, and newly promoted to Chief Strategy Officer. She was also the woman who had been sleeping with my husband for 16 months. She rested one hand on the back of his chair as if she already owned everything attached to him. Blake pulled our wedding photograph from the silver frame on his bookshelf. He looked at it for less than a second before dropping it into the recycling bin. "We're making room for a different future," he said. Madison smiled without showing her teeth. I looked down at the papers around my shoes. Blake had expected tears, maybe begging, maybe the scene he could later describe as proof that I was unstable. Instead, I set my purse on the nearest chair, knelt, and gathered every page in order. I smoothed the corners against my knee. Then I signed only the 6 places my attorney had marked with yellow tabs. When I stood, Blake's expression had changed. My calm made him uneasy, but not enough to make him careful. "That's it?" he asked. "That's it. No speech about everything you sacrificed?" "Not today." He laughed for the room. "Good. Maybe you're finally learning when to stop taking credit for standing near successful people." Several employees flinched. Madison lowered her eyes, but I saw the pleasure in her face. I placed the signed packet on the table and picked up the empty silver frame from the recycling bin. I did not retrieve the photograph. I wanted the frame because I had paid for it with the first consulting check Bennett Urban Partners ever earned, back when Blake and I shared a subleased room in Midtown Atlanta with 2 used laptops, a folding table, and $186,000 in debt. "Congratulations on the contract," I told him. "You should enjoy this moment while it still belongs to you." His smile thinned. I left before anyone could decide whether that was a threat. It was not. I had no intention of inventing evidence, buying revenge, or using my family's name to crush him. I had spent 5 months doing something much simpler. I had started keeping the truth where Blake could no longer edit it. When we met, Blake was 31 and I was 28. He had a talent for walking into a room and making exhausted people believe the future was waiting just outside the door. I had a talent for finding the numbers that proved whether the door actually led anywhere. He wanted to build a redevelopment advisory company that would help small southern cities turn abandoned industrial sites into housing, offices, and public space. His original plan was 19 pages of ambition with no workable financing model, no risk analysis, and no understanding of how public-private contracts were structured. I stayed up for 3 nights rebuilding it. On the 4th morning, he read my version at the kitchen counter of my apartment. "This is what I was trying to say," he whispered. "Then say it clearly when you meet the investors." He looked at me with such open gratitude that I believed I was seeing his character. I was seeing his hunger. At first, there was nothing wrong with that hunger. I loved it. I introduced him to a retired banker named Harold Pierce, who became our first outside investor. I persuaded a cautious family office to give us a second meeting after Blake spent the entire first meeting talking past their questions. I negotiated our first municipal contract in Macon after discovering a grant structure the city's own consultant had overlooked. I recruited Calvin Brooks, a methodical accountant who later became our chief financial officer. I wrote the risk model that saved our largest early project when soil contamination pushed the budget 22% above forecast. Blake sold the vision. I built the bridge beneath it. For several years, he said we in every room. Then reporters started calling him a founder. Awards arrived with his name engraved on them. He was photographed in front of buildings whose financing plans had been drafted in my handwriting. Each time someone left me out, Blake promised the next profile would correct it. "You hate attention anyway," he would say. "Isn't it better that I handle the public side?" I did hate attention, but that was not the whole reason I remained invisible. The name on my driver's license was Nora Hayes Bennett. Hayes was my mother's maiden name. The name on my birth certificate was Nora Eleanor Whitmore. My grandfather had founded Whitmore Ridge Capital in Chicago. By the time I was in college, my family's investment group had offices in 4 states and holdings that appeared in business pages often enough to make strangers change their tone when they heard my last name. At 22, I watched a man date my sister for 8 months while secretly pitching my father. At 25, I discovered that 2 women I considered friends had been forwarding private family details to a financial blogger. By 28, I wanted to know who I was when the room did not recognize my name. So I moved to Atlanta, used Hayes professionally, and accepted a job analyzing municipal redevelopment projects. I told Blake that my family was financially comfortable and private. I told him I had an older brother named Ethan and parents who lived outside Chicago. I never lied about their existence. He simply never asked a question unless he thought the answer could help him that week. When we married, I made my boundaries clear. I did not want family money invested automatically. I wanted our marriage and our company to survive on work that could stand without the Whitmore name. For a long time, I thought they had. What Blake never knew was that Harold Pierce's early investment had been made through a small fund that Whitmore Ridge later acquired. The investment was legitimate, negotiated before the acquisition, and managed at arm's length. It gave Whitmore Ridge no right to run our company, but it did preserve a contractual right to request an independent audit if certain financial triggers were met. That clause would matter years later. At the beginning, I did not imagine needing it. Blake and I worked from dawn until midnight. We ate takeout on the floor and slept with spreadsheets open between us. When our first project closed, he carried me around the empty office until we both fell against the wall laughing. When my mother asked whether I was happy, I said yes without hesitation. The erasure happened gradually enough that I mistook it for efficiency. Blake began taking investor meetings alone because he was already downtown. He moved my financial models into company templates and removed the author history because clients prefer a unified brand. He introduced me as his wife before he introduced me as a strategist. When we hired employees, he gave me no official title because we had not yet decided what structure made sense. Somehow, 12 years passed without the structure ever making sense for me. I still approved budgets from home. I still fixed proposals at midnight. I still called Calvin when the cash flow forecast looked wrong. But on the organization chart, I did not exist. Madison arrived as an outside communications consultant. She understood visual presentation, investor events, and the exact tone Blake liked to hear when he entered a room. Within 6 months, she had a corner office. Within 9, she was traveling with him. Within 12, she had started wearing a thin gold bracelet I had seen charged to a client retention account. I discovered the affair because of a hotel receipt, but not in the way Blake later assumed. He had told me he was spending 3 nights in Nashville for a redevelopment conference. The hotel charge appeared on our company card as a 2-room executive booking. I called the hotel because the tax code on the receipt was wrong for the city listed. The clerk apologized and emailed the corrected folio. The corrected version showed a single suite, 2 spa treatments, dinner for 2, and a handwritten note attached to the reservation, anniversary setup requested by Ms. Shaw. I sat at my desk for nearly an hour staring at the words. I did not call Blake. I did not call Madison. I called an attorney. Rachel Kim had been my roommate during graduate school and had become a partner at a family law firm in Buckhead. She listened without interrupting while I explained the receipt, the missing corporate title, the investment history, and the growing number of personal expenses moving through company accounts. "Do you want to save the marriage?" she asked. The question hurt because I still loved the man Blake had been. I also knew that love was not evidence that the man still existed. I want to know what is true before I decide anything. Then do not confront him yet. Preserve what you lawfully have access to. Do not enter accounts that are not yours. Do not record private conversations illegally. And stop repairing his work without leaving a trail. That last instruction changed everything. For 12 years, I had treated my contributions like water, essential, available, and impossible to own. Rachel taught me to treat them like records. I copied emails from my own account, exported revision histories from documents I had authored, gathered calendars, letters, client notes, and the spiral notebooks I had dated since our first office. I found 23 versions of the original business plan with my edits. I found the email in which Blake asked me to make the numbers believable before his meeting with Harold. I found the financing structure I created for the Macon project and the message he sent afterward: they loved my model. He had written my, not our. I also found expenses that had nothing to do with infidelity and everything to do with fraud. 3 vendors I did not recognize had been paid unusually round amounts. Each contract was approved by Blake. The descriptions were vague: strategic sourcing, market positioning, stakeholder activation. I compared the mailing addresses with Georgia corporate records. A registered agent appeared in 2 files. That agent shared an office suite with Madison's cousin. I printed nothing at home because Blake had started checking the printer history. I saved only documents I was authorized to access and sent copies to Rachel through a secure legal portal. Meanwhile, I watched my husband teach himself to despise me. He began correcting me in front of waiters. He criticized the way I dressed for company dinners, even though he had stopped inviting me to most of them. He described Madison as hungry and me as comfortable. If I asked why a proposed budget omitted a reserve, he said I was afraid of growth. If I proved the reserve was necessary, he used the revised number without mentioning me. The cruelest moment came late on a Sunday night. Blake was preparing a proposal for a riverfront project in Savannah. I noticed that his financing schedule would trigger a loan covenant 5 months too early. I rebuilt the schedule and left the corrected version open on his laptop. He walked in from the patio, saw the model, and laughed. "You really cannot help yourself, can you? Your covenant date is wrong. My team can handle it. Your team sent you this version." He closed the laptop. "Being married to me does not mean you built my company." I looked at him and realized he needed that sentence to be true more than he needed the company to survive. "Check cell G47 before you submit it," I said. The next day, the proposal went out with my correction. I saved the timestamp. 5 weeks later, Blake asked for a divorce over breakfast. He did not mention Madison. He said we had grown in different directions. Then he slid a settlement proposal across the counter that offered me our small condo near Piedmont Park, $380,000, and a confidentiality clause broad enough to prevent me from claiming any role in the company. "This is generous," he said. "You have never had a formal position. Because you never gave me one. Because you never wanted one. That is not the same thing." He leaned back. "Nora, do not turn this into a fantasy where you were secretly the founder. You helped. Wives help." I thought about the hotel suite, the fake vendors, and 12 years of tracked changes. "I'll have my attorney review it." His face tightened. "You have an attorney?" "I do now." That was the morning he realized I had been preparing. It was also the morning he began trying to frighten me into rushing. He canceled my access to shared company drives. He changed the code on the home office. He told employees I was having an emotional breakdown and should not be given financial information. He sent Rachel a letter accusing me of stealing trade secrets from a business he claimed I had never worked for. The contradiction would later become useful. At 44, I moved into a furnished apartment with 2 suitcases, 6 banker boxes, and the empty silver frame. My family did not know yet. I had been distant from them for years, partly because Blake found every visit exhausting and partly because I was ashamed to admit that the independence I had defended had become a cage I was helping him lock. Rachel never pushed me to call them. She pushed me to make decisions that would remain sound even if my last name were ordinary. "What do you want from the divorce?" she asked during our second meeting. "I want a fair accounting." "Money?" "Money that was hidden, yes. But more than that, I want the record corrected. I want him unable to use a settlement to erase my work. That may involve corporate litigation beyond the divorce. Then we do it correctly." She studied me. "Do you want to destroy him?" "No. I want every consequence to come from a choice he can recognize as his own." Blake dragged the case out for 5 months. In public, he behaved as if he were protecting a fragile wife from humiliation. In private, his messages swung between contempt and panic. "You are making this ugly. Madison says the board is worried about your behavior. Take the offer before legal fees consume it. You have no idea what it takes to build a company." Rachel answered through formal channels. I answered only when required. During discovery, Blake swore that all material assets had been disclosed. He listed the condo, retirement accounts, cash, and his shares in Bennett Urban Partners. The business valuation he submitted treated Madison's promotion and several vendor contracts as evidence of future growth. It treated me as a non-working spouse. Our forensic accountant, Olivia Grant, found discrepancies but not enough to prove where the money had gone. Blake's attorneys produced thousands of pages in a disorganized dump. In the middle were invoices from the same 3 vendors I had flagged. The totals were larger than before, but the beneficial owners remained obscured. "We can ask the divorce judge for more time," Rachel said. "But corporate ownership and third-party transfers will move slowly. If you refuse every settlement, you could be here another year." I looked at the proposed judgment. It did not waive fraud claims based on later discovered assets. It did not surrender my right to establish authorship or ownership interests in separate corporate proceedings. Rachel had cut the confidentiality clause down to protection of personal medical and financial details, not my history. "If I sign this, can we still follow the money?" "Yes. If he lied under oath, the judgment can be reopened. Then let him believe he has finished." The final hearing took place at Fulton County Superior Court on a wet Thursday in March. I wore a charcoal coat over an ivory dress and carried a dark green leather folder. Blake arrived with Madison's hand looped through his arm, although she had no reason to be in the courthouse. He wanted me to see the future he had chosen. The judge reviewed the agreement, asked whether I understood it, and entered the divorce after 42 minutes. 14 years of marriage ended with a signature and the soft strike of a gavel. In the hallway, Madison whispered something that made Blake laugh. They waited beside the elevators until I approached. "You look relieved," I said. "I am," Blake replied. "Now you can stop introducing yourself through me." Madison's mouth curved. She had started wearing the gold bracelet openly. Blake stepped closer. "You wanted your little apartment and your dramatic files. You got them. But be realistic, Nora. Without my name, you are nobody in this city." The elevator doors opened behind me, but no one stepped out. Instead, through the glass entrance, I saw a black SUV pull to the curb. The driver came around, but the passenger door opened first. Ethan Whitmore climbed out wearing a dark overcoat and the tired expression of an older brother who had spent 5 months respecting a boundary he hated. He crossed the lobby, took the green folder from my hand, and kissed my forehead. "You done doing this alone?" he asked. "I'm done hiding." Blake stared at him. His face lost color so quickly that Madison reached for his arm. For 4 years, Blake had sent proposals, invitations, and requests for introductions to Ethan Whitmore, chief executive of Whitmore Ridge Capital. He had once spent an entire anniversary dinner complaining that Ethan's office would not return his calls. "Why is he here?" Blake asked. I turned toward the man who had slept beside me for 14 years without learning the one fact he would have valued most. He came for his sister. Blake's phone rang before he could answer. He looked at the screen, frowned, and walked several feet away. I watched his shoulders stiffen. The call lasted less than a minute. When he returned, his eyes moved from Ethan to me. "What did you do?" "I signed the papers you wanted. The board just scheduled an emergency session. They said an independent audit has been triggered." Madison's hand fell away from his sleeve. "Then I suggest you bring your records," I said. Ethan opened the SUV door for me. Before I climbed in, Blake grabbed the top edge of it. "You were a Whitmore this whole time?" "I was Nora this whole time." That should have been enough. The door closed between us. For several blocks, neither Ethan nor I spoke. Rain striped the windows. My phone vibrated 3 times in my purse, stopped, and started again. Ethan picked it up, placed it face down on the seat between us, and said, "You do not have to answer him." "I'm not going to." "Good. But I need you to understand something before this goes any further. I am not asking Whitmore Ridge to punish my ex-husband. You are asking us to enforce a contract. I'm asking for an independent review because the trigger conditions were met. No threats. No invented pressure. No calls to reporters." Ethan looked out the window. "You still think I need you to teach me the difference between revenge and governance? I think you are my brother, and I know how angry you are." He exhaled through his nose. "I have imagined several illegal things. Despite everything, I laughed." His expression softened. "I won't do any of them." The audit right belonged to Hawthorne Municipal Fund, the small early investor Whitmore Ridge had acquired 7 years after Bennett Urban Partners was formed. The fund's agreement allowed a review if the company missed specific reporting obligations or if documented related party transactions exceeded a threshold. Blake had crossed both lines. The request had been approved by the fund's independent committee, not by Ethan alone. A national forensic accounting firm would conduct the work. Whitmore Ridge would pay its contractual share, but it could not decide the findings. That distinction mattered to me. If Blake fell, I wanted him to fall against facts, not influence. Ethan took me to our parents' home in Chicago 2 days later. I had not sat at their dining table in almost 6 years. My mother opened the door and held my face in both hands before she hugged me. My father stayed several steps behind her, as if he was afraid a sudden movement might send me away again. At dinner, no one asked why I had hidden so long. They asked what I needed now. "A room for a few days," I said. "And no rescue plan." My father looked at Ethan. Ethan raised both hands. "She already gave me the speech." My mother reached across the table. "We can support you without taking over." I nodded, but the kindness made my throat ache more than anger ever had. The next morning, Rachel joined us by video. She had assembled 8 encrypted folders. Folder 1 held the business plans and document histories. Folder 2 held investor correspondence. Folder 3 held municipal proposals and risk models. Folder 4 held board minutes and calendars. Folder 5 held the affair-related expenses. Folder 6 held the 3 questionable vendor streams. Folder 7 held Blake's contradictory claims about whether I had ever worked for the company. Folder 8 held my notebooks. There were 517 emails, 21 versions of early plans, 46 calendar entries, and 12 years of handwritten dates. "The auditors will not accept a story just because it is compelling," Rachel said. "Every statement must map to a record or a witness." "Good," I said. "That is the only kind of story I want them to hear." The first witness was Calvin Brooks. He called me before speaking with the auditors. His voice sounded older than it had 6 months earlier. "I should have called you when Blake locked you out," he said. "Why didn't you?" "Because I have 2 children in college, a mortgage, and the kind of courage that arrives after someone else opens the door." It was not an admirable answer, but it was honest. Tell the auditors the truth, I said. Do not improve it for me. Calvin confirmed that I had interviewed him in our first year, designed the original reporting controls, and handled investor modeling for nearly a decade. He produced an email from Blake instructing him to remove my name from a revised financing memorandum because Nora is not client-facing. He also produced 14 warnings he had sent about travel expenses, jewelry, luxury rentals, and consulting invoices connected to Madison. One of those messages had been answered by Blake in 6 words: reclassify them and stop creating problems. The auditors interviewed Harold Pierce next. He was 73 now and living in Charleston. On video, he held up the original investment memo I had mailed him in a blue binder. I invested because Nora could explain the downside without killing the dream, he said. Blake could sell sunlight at noon, but she knew where the shadows would land. The lead auditor asked whether he considered me a co-founder. There would have been nothing to fund without her. Call that whatever your lawyers require. Blake learned about Harold's interview that afternoon. He called me 7 times and sent 11 messages. Why did you never tell me who Ethan was? You deceived me for our entire marriage. Your family is manufacturing a takeover. This is not who you are. I replied to the last message only. You never learned who I was. He answered immediately. I knew you better than anyone. I turned off my phone. Within 1 week, Blake filed a complaint accusing me, Rachel, and Whitmore Ridge of defamation and tortious interference. His lawyer withdrew it 3 days later after reviewing the investor agreement and the documents Blake had signed. The withdrawal was quiet, but his panic was not. He summoned department heads into private meetings and demanded loyalty statements. He told staff that my family was attempting a hostile takeover. He instructed the communications team to prepare a biography describing Madison as the architect of the company's recent growth. That biography created a new problem for him. To support Madison's claim, her team attached project summaries to a draft press release. Several summaries reused language from my files, including an unusual phrase I had written 9 years earlier: capital patience matched to civic urgency. A junior communications manager named Leah Price recognized the phrase from an archived proposal carrying my initials. She sent both versions to the auditors. Leah had been in the room when Blake threw the divorce papers. She included a short note. I am ashamed that I looked away. I read the sentence twice. Then I wrote back through Rachel. Looking away is not the same as throwing the papers. Tell the truth now. The audit expanded from expense classification to authorship, governance failures, and related party transfers. That was when Madison realized Blake had placed her close enough to the fraud to be blamed for it. Her attorney contacted Rachel on a Monday morning. Madison wanted cooperation credit from the company and protection against any attempt by Blake to make her solely responsible. She was willing to provide devices, messages, vendor instructions, and a sworn statement about their relationship. She did not ask me for forgiveness. Rachel said that was the first intelligent choice Madison had made. We met in a conference room at Rachel's office with both attorneys present. Madison wore a gray dress and no gold bracelet. Without Blake beside her, she looked younger and less certain. I expected anger to rise when I saw her. What I felt instead was a cold clarity. I know you hate me, she began. This meeting is not about whether I hate you. Blake said you had never worked for the company. He said you used family money to control him and then lost interest. Did you believe him when you saw him use my models? She looked at the table. Did you believe him when he charged your bracelet to a client account? Her face flushed. No, she said. Then do not spend this meeting pretending you were fooled about everything. Madison's attorney touched her sleeve, but Madison nodded. I was fooled about the vendors, she said. Not about you. About the money. She opened a laptop and showed us a message thread. Blake had instructed her to divide payments among 3 consulting entities and label the invoices according to a rotating list. He said the arrangement was approved by the board's compensation committee. It was not. When Madison asked why the money needed to move before the divorce, Blake told her he was protecting future growth from a spouse who had contributed nothing. In another thread, he promised they would buy a house on Lake Oconee after the divorce using the reserve. How much was in the reserve? Rachel asked. I thought it was about $900,000, Madison replied. Thought? He never gave me the total. He just told me which invoices to approve. The forensic team traced the money over the next 10 days. It was not $900,000. Blake had moved $3.4 million through 3 vendor contracts over 18 months. One entity leased a furnished house in Madison's name. Another paid for travel, jewelry, and a private membership. The third transferred money into an investment account controlled through a trust Blake had not disclosed in the divorce. He had not merely spent company money on his affair. He had hidden marital assets while swearing under oath that his disclosure was complete. Rachel filed a motion to reopen the property judgment the same afternoon. The court issued an order preventing transfers from the trust while the matter was reviewed. The auditors notified the board and referred the tax questions to outside counsel. No one in my family made those decisions. Blake's signatures did. That night, he went to the Atlanta office and found his access card disabled. The board had voted unanimously to suspend him pending a final hearing. 2 security officers escorted him from the executive floor. The elevator opened onto the same conference area where he had humiliated me. Several of the same 31 employees were still working late. This time, no champagne glasses were in their hands. They watched him carry a cardboard box past the carpet where the divorce papers had landed. Leah told Rachel that Blake kept saying, "This is my company." Calvin answered once. Then you should have protected it. Madison did not wait for him downstairs. She had blocked his number before the elevator reached the lobby. The suspension triggered 2 client reviews, a lender inquiry, and a call from an Atlanta business reporter. Blake gave the reporter a statement claiming that a billionaire family was retaliating against him for divorcing their daughter. For several hours, the story gained traction online. Comments described me as a spoiled heiress who had hidden her identity to trap an ambitious man. The board's response was 3 sentences long. The investigation was based on internal company records, independent witness testimony, and transactions authorized by Blake Bennett. Whitmore Ridge had no role in determining findings or employment action. The company would cooperate with all lawful inquiries. The reporter updated the article. Then Calvin agreed to be quoted by name. That same afternoon, an envelope arrived at Rachel's office containing 17 signed statements from current and former employees. Leah had organized them without telling me. Some described seeing me revise proposals after hours. Others remembered that Blake brought me into difficult meetings only after his team had failed to solve a problem. A former analyst attached a calendar invitation from 8 years earlier with the subject line "Nora Rescue Session." He apologized for the joke in a handwritten note. One statement came from Maria Ellis, the office manager who had ordered food for our earliest investor meetings. She remembered me sleeping on a love seat before the Macon presentation and washing coffee cups at sunrise because we could not afford cleaning service. Blake later told new employees that he had spent that night alone. Maria wrote, "I watched the company learn to forget her because forgetting her made the boss comfortable. I helped by staying quiet." The statements did not prove the hidden transfers, but they proved something the spreadsheets could not. Erasure was not a single omission in an annual report. It was a culture Blake had trained people to maintain. Every time someone saw my work and credited him, the next person found it easier to do the same. I asked Rachel whether the employees were putting their jobs at risk. "Some may be," she said. "The interim oversight team has issued a preservation and anti-retaliation order, but fear does not vanish because a memo says it should. Make sure they know I am not asking anyone to choose me over the company." Rachel gave me a tired smile. Nora, telling the truth about how a company was built is not choosing against it. I copied Maria's sentence into my notebook. For years, I had believed silence protected the business from personal conflict. Now I could see that silence had not protected the company. It had protected the person most willing to misuse it. Public sympathy moved, but I had spent too many years living inside other people's versions of me to depend on it. I did not answer strangers. I returned to Atlanta and sat with Rachel while she prepared for the final board hearing and the reopened divorce case. My father called that evening. "Are you all right?" "I don't know yet." Good answer. Most people want me to say I feel powerful. Power is not the same as peace. Did you know I was helping Blake build the company? We knew enough to worry and not enough to interfere. Why didn't you come get me? There was a long pause. Because you were not a child to be collected, he said. And because we thought respecting your independence meant waiting silently. We may have waited too long. I closed my eyes. I waited too long too. Then perhaps everyone can stop waiting now. I believed the hidden trust was the final revelation. It was large enough to reopen the divorce, clear enough to end Blake's defense, and ugly enough to explain why he had rushed me toward settlement. I was wrong. 9 days before the board hearing, Madison's attorney found an audio file in a cloud backup. Georgia law allowed a person to record a conversation in which that person participated. Madison had recorded Blake during an argument because she believed he was about to leave her. The recording lasted 14 minutes. In it, Blake ordered her to divide a $480,000 transfer into smaller invoices to avoid an internal review threshold. He told her the trust would fund their new life once my divorce was final. When she asked what would happen if Calvin discovered the transfers, Blake laughed. "We blame Calvin for weak controls," he said. "If that fails, we say Madison exceeded her authority. Nora will be gone, and nobody has ever listened to her." There was a pause on the recording. Then Madison asked, "What if she proves she built the models?" Blake answered, "A wife does not get to invoice a husband for believing in him." I listened once. Rachel asked whether I wanted a break. "No," I said. "Play the rest." The final 4 minutes did not contain another crime. They contained something more intimate. Blake described how he planned to rewrite the company history after I was gone. He would remove older project pages, replace founder biographies, and credit Madison with the strategic work. He said people remembered whatever appeared in the newest presentation. For 12 years, I had wondered whether he understood what he was taking from me. The recording answered the question. He understood completely. The final board hearing took place in a private conference center near Buckhead. The room had a long walnut table, 2 wall screens, and windows looking across the Atlanta skyline. I arrived with Rachel, not Ethan. My brother waited in another room because I wanted every person at that table to understand that my evidence did not need his body beside it. Blake sat at the far end wearing a navy suit that hung slightly loose at the shoulders. His attorney had arranged 5 binders in front of him. Madison entered with her own counsel and chose a chair against the wall, nowhere near Blake. The lead forensic auditor spoke for almost 2 hours. He mapped the 3 vendor entities, the invoices, the concealed trust, and the personal expenses. He showed the board Blake's approval history and Calvin's warnings. He explained how the money movement intersected with Blake's sworn divorce disclosures. Then he shifted to company formation. On the screen appeared the 21 versions of the original business plan. My initials were embedded in revision logs. Investor letters referred to meetings I had arranged. Municipal contracts contained risk language from my notebooks. Project files showed years of corrections made through my account hours before Blake presented them under his name. The auditor displayed a page I had written 11 years earlier after our Macon contract closed. Blake will present the model tomorrow. I hope someday he says we built it together. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then Blake struck the table with his palm. This is a staged execution, he said. Whitmore Ridge acquired that fund because Nora told them to. Her family has wanted control from the beginning. The fund's independent chair answered by video. The acquisition had included 38 small positions and had been approved years before the divorce. The audit trigger was mechanical. Blake himself had certified the agreement twice. Do you deny authorizing the vendor payments? The board chair asked. Blake turned toward Madison. She managed those relationships. Ask her. Madison's attorney connected a laptop to the screen. Blake's voice filled the room. We heard him explain the invoice rotation. We heard him mention the trust. We heard him plan to blame Calvin and Madison. We heard him say that no one had ever listened to me. His face changed as the recording played. At first, he looked angry. Then calculating. Finally, frightened. When it ended, Madison stood. I had an affair with a married man, she said. I accepted gifts I knew were improper, and I approved invoices I should have questioned. I am responsible for that. But I will not accept responsibility for a scheme he designed, and I will not let him use me the way he used his wife and his chief financial officer. She did not look at me. I was grateful. The moment did not belong to reconciliation. Harold Pierce joined by video and confirmed that his original investment depended on my analysis. Calvin identified the reporting controls I had designed and the warnings Blake overrode. Leah described the document language copied into Madison's biography. A former city manager from Macon said I had negotiated the financing term that made the project possible. Blake's attorney requested a recess. During the break, Blake found me in the hallway beside a wall of windows. You got what you wanted, he said. The hearing is not over. Do not pretend this is about process. You brought your family into my company. Your company accepted their fund's money and their audit terms. You hid who you were. I used my mother's name. I told you I had a family. You never wanted to know them until you thought they could fund you. His jaw tightened. If you had told me at the beginning, none of this would have happened. Which part? The affair? The theft? Or the years you removed my name from my own work? I would have treated you differently. The honesty of that sentence stopped me. That is exactly why I did not tell you. He looked through the glass toward the room where Ethan waited. Tell your brother to call this off. I can restore the money. I can correct the website. You can take a board seat. You are still offering me pieces of what you never owned. Nora, I built this. You built parts of it. So did I. So did Calvin. So did dozens of employees. Your need to be the only builder is why you are losing it. His voice dropped. I did love you. Maybe. But you loved being larger and my silence more. The board reconvened. The vote to terminate Blake was unanimous. The company would seek restitution, preserve records for tax and law enforcement review, and cooperate with the court handling the hidden marital assets. Madison resigned and entered a cooperation agreement that did not erase her misconduct. Calvin was retained to stabilize operations under oversight from an interim chief executive. Then the board addressed the corporate history. Its resolution directed Bennett Urban Partners to correct formation narratives, investor materials, project archives, and its annual report. The company would identify me as co-founder and founding strategy and finance lead. The resolution also created a review process for other employees whose work had been credited upward without documentation. The board chair read the language aloud. Nora Hayes Whitmore Bennett, co-founder. My name did not sound like a trophy. It sounded like a door unlocking. Blake remained seated after the meeting ended. His attorney whispered to him, but he watched me collect my folder. Help me fix this, he said. You told the room I did not belong in the office. I was angry. You threw divorce papers at my feet for your mistress and 31 employees to watch. I made a mistake. A mistake is sending the wrong attachment. You rehearsed that humiliation. You brought Madison into the room. You removed our photograph. You wanted witnesses. His eyes filled, but I no longer needed to decide whether the tears were real. We can repair the marriage, he said. The marriage ended long before the judge signed it. The judge only stopped us from pretending. You cannot just walk away from everything we built. I looked back at the conference room, where Calvin was speaking with the interim executive and the auditors were packing their files. Watch me. Rachel and I walked to the elevator. Ethan was waiting near the lobby, but he did not come forward until I nodded. How did it go? He asked. The record will be corrected. And Blake? He finally has to live without my work arriving overnight. The reopened divorce case resolved 4 months later. The trust assets were frozen, valued, and included in a revised property division. Blake was ordered to reimburse legal and forensic costs associated with the non-disclosure. Separate corporate restitution and tax matters continued without my control. Rachel made sure the final order did not imply that every dollar belonged to me or that my family had purchased justice. It stated the simpler truth: Blake had concealed assets and sworn that he had not. Madison lost her title and most of the reputation she had treated as permanent. Her cooperation reduced some consequences, but it did not turn her into a hero. I did not forgive her, and I did not organize my future around hating her. She had been both participant and potential scapegoat. Both facts could exist at the same time. Blake sold his house and several investments to satisfy restitution and legal obligations. The business pages that had once called him a visionary now described him as a former executive. Some criminal and tax questions remained unresolved when I stopped checking. Consequences had become someone else's work. 3 months after the board vote, I received a copy of the corrected annual report. The line beside my name was brief. Co-founder, founding strategy and finance lead. I printed 1 page and placed it in the empty silver frame. The wedding photograph stayed in the past. The frame now held a fact. The board offered me the permanent chief executive role. I declined. I had already spent 12 years building a dream that required me to disappear. I did not want my freedom to become another attempt to save Blake's legacy. Instead, I used part of my revised settlement and my own family assets to start the Visible Ledger project in Atlanta. We provided low-cost legal, accounting, and documentation support to people, especially spouses and relatives, whose unpaid work had built family businesses without contracts, titles, equity records, or public credit. In our February 1st weeks, 37 people requested consultations. The first client I met was a woman named Denise who had run scheduling, payroll, and customer relationships for her husband's plumbing company for 18 years. Her name appeared nowhere except old emails. He was preparing to sell the company and had offered her a used car and $25,000 to leave quietly. Denise sat across from me twisting a tissue. He says I was just helping, she whispered. I opened a yellow legal pad. What did you do on the first day? I answered the phone. What happened after that? For 3 hours, she gave me dates, customers, employee names, bank deposits, emergency calls, and systems she had created. We referred her to an attorney and a forensic accountant. Her records did not guarantee a particular outcome, but they stopped the sale long enough for her contribution and marital interest to be evaluated fairly. When she called weeks later, she was crying. They put my name in the agreement, she said. I looked at the silver frame on my office shelf. Read it twice, I told her. Then keep a copy somewhere safe. My parents attended the opening of our permanent office. My mother brought flowers. My father walked through the rooms reading every sign as if he were inspecting a museum. Ethan stood beside the coffee station and claimed he had not funded anything, which was technically true and emotionally ridiculous because he had taken 14 calls about lease language. At lunch, my father asked a question he had avoided for years. Why did you stay away from us? I could have blamed Blake. He had discouraged visits, mocked family traditions, and treated my independence as proof that I needed no one. But he had not locked the door between Chicago and Atlanta. I wanted my life to prove I did not need the Whitmore name, I said. Then I became afraid that coming home would prove I had failed. My mother shook her head. Coming home proves you know where home is. My father took my hand. Are you finished making yourself smaller so other people can feel tall? Yes. He smiled. Then welcome back. Nearly a year after Blake threw the papers, I spoke at a conference for 600 women in business. The event organizer introduced me as an heiress who had used a powerful family to defeat a dishonest husband. Before walking on stage, I asked her to change it. She looked startled. But that is the hook everyone knows. It is the version that makes rescue more interesting than preparation. On stage, I told the audience about the carpet, the silver frame, and the 31 people who could not look at me. I told them about the SUV outside the courthouse because pretending it had not mattered would be another kind of lie. My brother's name had made Blake afraid. My family's fund had possessed an audit right. Privilege had given me resources many women never receive. Then I told them what privilege had not done. It had not written 12 years of notebooks. It had not preserved the emails. It had not made Calvin tell the truth, Madison save the recording, Harold keep the binder, Leah recognize a stolen sentence, or the auditors follow the money. It had not forced Blake to approve false invoices or hide $3.4 million. Most importantly, it had not made me leave. People say my brother arrived at the courthouse and rescued me, I said. He did not. By the time that SUV reached the curb, I had already lived 5 months in an apartment with 2 suitcases. I had already signed the papers. I had already stopped correcting Blake's work in the dark. Ethan did not give me a voice. He arrived after I decided to stop donating mine to a man who used it to speak over me. In the first row, my mother covered her mouth. My father stood before anyone else did. Ethan remained seated, wiping his eyes and pretending to check his phone. Afterward, women lined up with stories. A baker whose recipes had been registered under her brother's name. A dental office manager whose husband called her labor family help. A software designer whose boyfriend had pitched her code as his product. Not every case involved marriage, money, or fraud. The common thread was simpler. Someone had benefited from making their work look invisible. I could not promise each person a dramatic board vote. I could teach them to preserve drafts, dates, messages, decisions, witnesses, and agreements. I could help them understand that documentation was not disloyalty. It was memory with a spine. Blake believed my silence meant emptiness. He saw me kneel on the office carpet and thought he had reduced me to the position I deserved. What he never understood was that I was not gathering proof of my defeat. I was gathering pages he had signed. Those divorce papers closed a marriage. The records behind them corrected a company. The empty frame that once held our wedding photograph now sits in my office beside a row of client files, holding the line Blake spent 12 years trying to erase. Co-founder. He wanted me on my knees so his mistress and employees would remember that I was nobody. Instead, they remembered the day he threw the truth on the floor and ordered the woman who built his company to pick it up.